Hey guys, welcome back. So, before we start today's video, as always, just want to say a massive thank you to you all, everyone who's been watching, everyone who's been liking, sharing, and all the new subscribers, welcome back. If you're not subscribed yet, please just hit the notification bell, hit the icon up top. I will never ask you guys for money, but it just a subscription is always free. So with today's case, if you come here from TikTok, I usually do like little intro videos just to talk about the cases that we're going to be discussing. But if you haven't, so some of us of a certain age, we would be familiar with the soap opera Brookside. You may be familiar with the storyline involving Nat and Georgia, or even if you watch Hollyoaks, you may remember the storyline involving Beth and Reese. But what happens when actual storylines become someone's reality? So the case I'm going to be talking to you about today is that of Sarah Barrass and Brandon Machin. So with all that said and done, let's get into the story. So Sarah, she was born in 1984 in Sheffield, and she was born into a single parent family, and she had 4 siblings, and all of the children, they were conceived by different fathers. Not saying that in a negative way, these things happen, but I'm just giving you the background information. So all of our siblings were half siblings, but for the purpose of the video and the way that we view this, obviously I'm just going to refer to them as her brothers and sisters. So the house that Sarah grew up in, it was described as just pure chaos. So there was apparently no rules set in place, no boundaries. The children didn't have any set bath times, bed times, feeding times. They just helped themselves to whatever food was in the house at any time that they wanted. They were often said to be really absent from school, and their school attendance was incredibly low. And the mother would often have various people around that she shouldn't have. The children were exposed to often witness drug and alcohol binges with these visitors, and Sarah in particular, she was alleged to have suffered from sexual abuse from a young age, and this was from a number of the visitors. And these allegations led to social services actually stepping in, and they placed 5 children into care. And the children then spent quite a number of years flitting in between foster parents and different care authorities. And at some point they were then returned actually to their mother. So Sarah at this time was 9 years old, and she was said to have developed a really close connection to her older brother Brandon. So Brandon was 4 years older. He was born in 1980, and around this time, so Sarah was 9, Brandon would have been about 13, and Brandon was described as a bit of a bully, quite a mischievous troublemaker, and he had a high level of aggression towards the other children. He was said to just randomly attack his siblings and other kids on the streets with punches and kicks. But at this particular time, Sarah, she was the complete opposite. She was quite shy and reserved, and she was actually quite caring to her younger siblings. She was also said to have looked up to Brandon and admired him, and this is when she began imitating all his behaviour towards other kids. She was getting into fights, she was watching Brandon fight, and on one occasion Brandon was said to have got hold of their younger brother Martin, and reportedly held Martin upside down and began repeatedly hitting his head onto the floor underneath him. And while this was going on, Sarah reportedly just stood in the corner and she was laughing and giggling about this. On another occasion, Sarah was out with her sister and they were climbing a tree when Sarah pushed her sister out of the tree. And her sister reportedly suffered from really serious injuries after this. So Brandon and Sarah then grew a fascination with horror movies. And again, I'm not saying that a negative thing. We all probably viewed horror movies when we were kids. I certainly did. I still have a fascination and a love for horror films, and that's from a young age. And they confessed that they loved the blood and the gore, and one of their favourite films was A Nightmare on Elm Street. So obviously, we're bearing in mind we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s. Freddy Krueger was seen as this massive icon, and a lot of people did grow an obsession with that particular fictional character. So this led to them reportedly harming animals. They would climb trees to raid bird nests and kill the birds using stones. And all of the siblings, they reportedly had a collection of pet mice. And one day, Brandon and Sarah actually let the mice out of the cage to run around on the floor. And this is where they proceeded to begin stamping on the mice in front of their brothers and sisters. So they described Brandon and Sarah as psychopaths, and eventually this led to the children being removed from their mother's care once again. Sarah, she ended up returning to her mother aged 14, and at this age, Sarah then went to the police to report historic abuse, with one perpetrator actually charged and found guilty for rape. And Brandon was now 18, and it was said at this time he and Sarah had actually begun sending inappropriate love letters towards one another. These letters were eventually being found by the mother, and she informed social services about the inappropriate relationship between her children. So at least her mother's moving in the right direction. You can see that. I don't know what was in these letters. All I know is obviously what we go on to learn about these two is you can draw from your own conclusion with that. But the social, this time, they didn't actually follow this up and investigate. And 2 years later, Sarah is now 16 and Brandon is now 20. And this is when they have sex for the first time. Brother and sister. And this carries on for a number of years. And at age 19, Sarah falls pregnant. So this would make Sarah not only the child's mother, but also her aunt. And it would make Brandon the father, but also the uncle. So really, really confusing. Not to mention, we all know about the defects that could happen with incestuous relationships and conceiving children in that kind of relationship. So they go on to, well, Sarah goes on to give birth to a son named Blake, and to hide obviously the illegal nature of her relationship, Sarah tells the hospital staff that the father wasn't interested in the baby and that she was going to be a single mum. And Sarah raises her son quite well, reportedly. And to the outside world, she seems like a single mum. Brandon is just a caring uncle who only lives down the road, pops round on a whim to visit and help his sister out. As, like I said, he only lived a few doors down from Sarah. And despite other family members being really suspicious of this situation, nothing is actually brought up and said. And a few months after having Blake, Sarah again falls pregnant, again with Brandon's baby. And they have another son who they call Tristan, with Sarah telling the nurses and the midwives the same story as before. So Tristan and Blake share the same father, but the father doesn't want, and while he's happy to continually have sex with Sarah, he wants nothing to do with the children that he's conceiving. And over the next few years, Sarah gets pregnant twice more by Brandon, giving birth to 2 more boys. And again, she just sticks with the exact same story. And now adding that he's a regular partner, as I said, but he doesn't want anything to do with them. And the 2 younger boys, they were never named in the court documents to protect their identities. The only reason Blake and Tristan were named, it becomes a bit clearer later on as the story unfolds, but the more children she had, they were never named in the court documents. And weirdly enough, hospital records, they actually showed documents that Sarah had signed, and in these particular documents there was a box that ticked that the baby wasn't conceived by a close family member. So this is one way that she was able to keep this relationship a secret. So to everyone, it really does appear that Sarah is just a single mum to 4 boys. Brandon is just a caring uncle. But Sarah and Brandon, they still find the time to continue this inappropriate relationship. Inappropriate and illegal. And as the 4 boys grow up, they naturally begin asking questions about their father, who their father is. They want to know why he's not in their lives, what happened in their relationship, and Sarah goes on to tell them the most bizarre lie that I've ever heard. So she actually tells them that their father was a soldier who died during World War II. Now, bearing in mind, obviously, this story unfolds over a number of years, so I'm looking at probably the early 2000s at this point. You're talking about 6 decades that this man's been dead, and I'm not sure if Sarah learned biology in school, but everyone knows obviously sperm doesn't last for 60 years. But this is the story that she goes with. This is the story that she tells her children, that he was a World War II veteran that died. So as the boys got older, it was clear that they had some serious development disabilities. The disabilities that they end up being diagnosed with, it's not anything to do with the incestuous relationship of their parents. It probably didn't help, but it's not a direct cause. I am quite frankly surprised there wasn't anything more serious, if I'm honest, that these boys were afflicted with. But Blake, he was diagnosed with ADHD and autism, and also with speech and communication difficulties. And Tristan, he was also diagnosed with ADD, along with speech and communication issues, and he was actually treated for several severe allergies throughout his life. So it's not been said what the 2 younger boys had been diagnosed with, but all 4 of them actually attended a special needs school. And it was said that Brandon would often show up at the house at 7 AM. He would do all the chores, look after the boys, all while Sarah just sort of lazed around, acting like a slob, barking her orders at Brandon to get this done, that done. So you can see a complete shift in dynamic of this relationship, so to speak. You know, growing up, Brandon was the more dominant one, but here we are now with Sarah being the more dominant one. He was the only one to actually change any nappies, to feed and take the children to school. He would then wait on Sarah hand and foot. And due to the children's special needs, the house was often visited by the social workers. Brandon was always present for these meetings, still playing obviously the caring uncle, and no questions were actually asked, no questions were put forward as to why he was always present. They just probably saw it as the fact that Sarah was a single mum to four children with complex needs, and she probably just needed all the support that she could get, and one of those supports were from her older brother. Now, one particular day, Sarah actually finds out that Brandon's been talking to another woman on Facebook, and she basically lost her temper. I don't know the full ins and outs of what happened. I can only imagine that obviously there was a fight, but I won't know further information on that one. So Blake and Tristan also find it hard, and both the boys were severely bullied at school, and they struggled to make friends. They were isolated, and there was really strong concerns that Brandon could have been physically abusing them. So Sarah and Brandon's brother Martin, so obviously if you remember earlier with Brandon holding Martin upside down and banging his head on the floor, so he claims that he was at the house one day to visit obviously his brother and sister. Bearing in mind, obviously none of the family know about this sexual relationship between Brandon and Sarah. So he said he witnessed Brandon violently dragging one of the toddlers across concrete, and Martin was understandably really shocked and upset and appalled by this, and he reported his brother to social services. But again, nothing was followed up, nothing was recorded about this. Sorry, there was obviously a record about it, but obviously nothing was followed up and nothing was investigated. I do apologise. So fast forward, Brad and Sarah are now in their 30s. The four boys are coming up for their teenage years, and the relationship at this point between Brad and Sarah, this has been going on for about 20 years now, so around 2 decades. And this is when they decide to add more children to the mix, and they go on to have another 2 boys. Again, these 2 boys had not been named for legal reasons. But Sarah, she doesn't want to stop there. She's desperate to have a daughter, and bizarrely she downloads an app on her phone, and this app can tell you the best ways to naturally conceive the specific gender that you're looking to conceive. So after having a 6th son, they're trying to conceive again, and meanwhile Sarah, she's claiming that the father of the 2 new boys is the same father of her 4 older sons. So he regularly just pops in, gets his end away, and buggers off when she's undoubtedly pregnant. Sarah even, like I said, she downloads this app, and to the outside world, it seems that Sarah was doing a good enough job for her kids. No questions were asked, and at the point of what's going to be happening, what happens to the boys, the boys are now 14, 13, 12, 11, 3 years old and 7 months old, with Blake and Tristan now starting a secondary school. So Blake was described as football mad. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and he he was said to have had the ability to just make people smile. And Tristan was described as mischievous and lovable. He loved showing off his personality through his clothes and hair, often dyeing his hair like really, really bright colours, something very similar to what I did when I was younger. And in 2017, Tristan was actually featured on a programme on the BBC, and this programme was discussing children transitioning from primary school into secondary school. And on this programme, Tristan had dyed his hair this bright fluorescent yellow. And this was to support his friend who had just been diagnosed with bone cancer. So yellow was reportedly his friend's favourite colour, and Tristan was raising money for a cancer charity. And in 2018, it was noticed that Blake and Tristan were showing complex behaviour problems. And the next 18 months, the boys were constantly in trouble, and social services visited the house a total number of 13 times in that 18 months. And these visits uncovered a whole heap of issues. So it was discovered that the boys had grown a real deep obsession with porn. Sarah was actually aware of this, and she attempted to make bans on the house. She confiscated any electrical equipment. She put a ban on the internet, so like parental guidance things, and then completely cutting it off for good. So the boys took this to the next step, and they tried to download porn at school. And this led to the school actually banning the boys from using the internet as well. And I know what you're thinking, like, you know, is how can you download porn at school? Because obviously those sort of sites would be blocked. You are right, they would be blocked, but there are means and ways around it. I don't know how, I don't know the full details. I remember when I was around 15 or 16, and I was at college, and I was using a library computer to do some coursework, and bearing in mind obviously public space, all the computers were lined up one next to the other, and a man came in. He sat down on the computer that was next to mine. I'm not sure what software he was using, but he was viewing porn in the library while I was sitting next to him. So like I said, I was 15, 16 at the time, so I don't know what kind of software it is that allows that sort of access, but it's just a vivid memory that came back while I was researching this case. So the social services, they advised Sarah to have an open door policy in the house. It was then discovered that Blake was having real deep sexual conversations with strangers online, with one of those people asking Blake to send naked images of himself. So bearing in mind, Blake's only 14 years old at this time. So the boys were sadly both getting really badly bullied, but they were taking after their dad's footsteps, and they were reacting with real deep-seated anger and violence. They also began viewing horror films like their parents before them, and they were starting to show aggression towards their younger brothers. Blake was also caught stealing his aunt's car, taking it for a joyride, because apparently Blake and Tristan also had a real fascination with cars and motorbikes, which we're going to come to in a little bit. But yeah, he got caught taking it for a joyride. And Tristan, he was found to be holding a knife in his possession. He was taking it to school in his bag, and there was concerns that he was more likely to self-harm rather than use it on other children. And Sarah said to that herself, she said that Tristan one day had confided in her that he actually wanted to hold a knife to his heart and stab himself. And she then informed the social, who put Tristan under a mental health assessment, and it's discovered that Blake and Tristan had been doing sexual acts with their younger brothers. On one occasion, Blake was found spying on one of the boys while he was in the shower. Tristan and Blake, they were also caught having a sexual conversation with the other boys. Tristan would often ask them to sit on his lap, and Sarah said that she was real concerned that there was a sexual nature behind this. I mean, obviously, she would know, but we're just going to go with the story. So yeah, I'm kind of put that little 2 pennies worth in. And the behaviour was also noticed at the school between Tristan and the other students, where he reportedly touched another student over their clothes, and another where he was invited to someone's house, and really bizarrely he began dressing in baby's clothing, or dressing as a baby and laying on the floor acting like a baby. Blake, he had been reported for asking one of his brothers to squeeze his genitals, and another where Tristan had asked Blake to actually masturbate him. Now, all of these incidents were reported by Sarah, so obviously you see that she is trying to do the right thing in the end. It's a pity she didn't really do the right thing throughout her whole entire adult life, but she's trying to do the right thing now when it comes to her children. The only advice she actually got when she was reporting this was to never leave Blake and Tristan alone with the other boys. So she began growing really concerned with the lack of help, and she was worried that she was raising monsters. She told the social that she wanted to be a police matter. She wanted Blake and Tristan arrested, and she was also scared that the other boys were going to be taken off her and put into care. So now this brings us to May of 2019. So a parent of a local child who was in primary school at this time, they made allegations against Tristan, saying that Tristan actually sexually assaulted their child. So the parents, they get involved, and they ask Sarah for information on the father of the boys. They thought that the boys were being abused by their father, and despite Sarah insisting that she had nothing to do with him, he had nothing to do with the children. So she basically just absolutely flat out refused to give the social services a name. Tristan was then moved on to a child in protection status. So Sarah then sends Brandon a text saying that the social were going to discover the secret, and that she was posting really weird things online over her Facebook. This included a Stephen King quote saying that murder is like potato chips, you can't just stop with one. In another, she said, I'm not mean or cold-hearted, I'm just sick of being fucked over. And in a third, she shared an image of the Grim Reaper with a caption saying, coming for you. She then sends text to her friend saying, I still feel like I found Blake. I should lock me and my first away so that we can't hurt anyone. I want to die daily. I want to run away and hide from everyone. Another message read, I love my kids too much to put them in care for the same reasons. And another, she said, I have thought of every possible solution to this mess, putting them all into care, chucking checking into the local nut house. So obviously that's not me saying that, I'm just reading out what she actually posted. We all know that obviously it's not now referred to as the nut house, but in context of this, of what I'm reading out and what she actually posted, so this is from her words, not mine. Or committing mass murder. So she added mass murder onto the end of that status. So she then sends a text to Brandon saying, they need to die now. I'd rather kill them and kill myself than lose them into care. I gave them life and I could take it away. Another text on the 23rd of May 2019, Sarah said to Brandon, they need to die now. They need to die today. And later that same day, Sarah's house, at Sarah's house, Brandon, he arrives and they put in plans a set of reasoning and planning for murdering their 6 children. So at this point, all 5 of the 6 boys had all been diagnosed with ADHD at this point. So Sarah, she goes to the pharmacy and collects the medication. So you can imagine 5 children with the same sort of complex social needs, that's going to be a hell of a lot of medication that she's going to be going to collect. She then informs friends and family that the boys have all come down with a sickness bug. They wouldn't be at school the next day. And just before bed that evening, Brandon and Sarah then forced the 4 older boys to swallow as many of the pills that they could. Now, obviously, the boys, they all try and resist this. But Sarah and Brandon, they both put pressure on the boys to carry this through and actually take all of the pills. They then put the boys to bed. Sarah goes to bed, goes to sleep. Brandon leaves, goes back to his own home. And the next morning, Sarah wakes up. She's expecting, obviously, her 4 children to have died in their sleep. But they were all still alive. And this really, really angered Sarah. They were all still alive, but they were incredibly sick. You can imagine they were all having real vivid hallucinations. Sorry about that. Blake and Tristan then get up, and despite being incredibly sick and hallucinating, they begin playing on their Nintendo Switch. And again, this really, really winds Sarah, makes her really angry. So she then sends a message to Brandon, telling him that their plan failed. So Brandon turns up, he comes over, and whilst the boys are upstairs, Brandon and Sarah begin researching the best ways to actually kill someone. Not always the best plan, because once this happens, and bearing in mind, obviously, we're talking about the murder of 6 children. How she thought she was going to get away with this, how she was going to talk herself out of this. She already has social services on her back. How was she going to explain away the deaths of her 6 boys? So, and they would obviously look into foul play, and they would take away any sort of electrical equipment. No matter how well you try and hide it, the police are always going to find it. So, like I said, Brandon, he turns up. They begin searching for the best ways to murder someone. They look up strangulation, they look up suffocation, they look up drowning. And when they feel that they've done this to the best of their ability, they walk into Blake and Tristan's room. Sarah, she then removes her dressing gown cord and she begins wrapping it around Tristan's neck. And naturally, obviously, Tristan tries to put up as strong a fight as he can, try to fight off his mum. She pulls tighter, begins strangling him. Christian's screaming and he's begging, but Sarah, she just carries on for a further 3 minutes, whilst Blake just basically watches on in horror. Blake then turns to Brandon and he says, "Why is Mum trying to kill Tristan?" He's begging Brandon to stop, to intervene, to do something. And instead, Brandon just turns to his oldest boy and begins strangling him with his bare hands. Believing Blake and Tristan are dead, Brandon and Sarah then leave the bedroom. They collect some bin bags and they wrap them around the boys' heads. They then fill up the bathtub and they walk their third son into the bathroom. They attempt to drown him, and the 12-year-old, he puts up a really good fight. His head coming above the water, screaming. They push him down as this keeps happening. And he's screaming, "Why are you trying to kill me?" And for unexplained reasons, they then come to their senses. They stop this murder from happening. So child 3, he survives, and this is the main reason. Obviously, he has never been named in the court documents. So Sarah then pauses, and in her head, she begins formulating another plan in her mind. This plan, she thinks that she's going to be able to put all of the blame onto Brandon. So she takes the 4 surviving children and barricades them into her bedroom door, behind her bedroom door, sorry. And she then begins detailing notes on her phone stating that Brandon is the father to her boys. The pills that didn't work, so he made her reportedly kill the older 2. He obviously killed Blake, but he forced her into it. She adds on that she sat in the bedroom with the others. He's going to kill them and then kill me. He's trying to drown my 3rd child. It's not working. I'm so scared. So I can only imagine, obviously, no, she refers to the 3rd child as by their name, but like I said, we don't know his name. So in a final note, she wrote, "If by some miracle my kids live, please look after them and make sure that they know that I love them." So she then texts her friend saying, he's trying to kill us. Tristan and Blake are already dead. So this friend, she receives this text quite early in the morning. So it's around 7:45. So this was only 45 minutes after Brandon had entered the property. Police then, they turn up to the house. 15 police cars turn up, 4 ambulances. The local school was actually shut down to use as a command base. Helicopters, they were flying overhead in case any one of them tried to run away. The police, they managed to break in and gain entry to the house. They find Brandon just casually sat on the sofa, as you do. And Sarah, she's still barricaded in the bedroom with her children. And when asked where Blake and Tristan are, Sarah, bizarrely, despite this plan that she reckons that she formed in her head, she lies to the police again. She says that they are at a neighbour's house, not thinking obviously the police are going to go and search every house and they're going to find the bodies in their bedroom still. So you can see what kind of person you're dealing with. However, one officer, like I said, he looks into the boy's bedroom, and as he's looking around, he makes eye contact with one of the surviving children, and this child looks him in the eye and makes this motion across his neck. This is to, as if to say they're dead. Sarah, she actually sees her boy do this, and she begins slapping his hand away. She's telling him not to do that. Police, however, they find the bodies of Tristan and Blake. They remove the bin bags, and by some miracle, Tristan and Blake, they're still alive at this point. So both the boys are then airlifted to a hospital, but sadly and shortly after arriving, both of them died within 12 minutes of each other. Immediately, Brandon and Sarah are arrested. Of course they are. And the 4 younger boys were then taken into the hospital. Children 3 and 4, they were said to be in a really bad way, still feeling the after effects of the drug overdose, but also in regards of obviously the 3rd boy, he was also nearly drowned in the bath. The boys 5 and 6, they remained unharmed. So during her police interview, Sarah hands over a page from a notebook headed with funeral arrangements, and she then places full responsibility onto Brandon. She admits that her brother is the father of her 6 children. She says that social services were about to discover this, and Brandon had coerced her into killing the kids to keep their secret. She tells the officers about the overdose with the ADHD medication, and she talks about what happened to Blake and Tristan and the attempted murder of child 3. And she said that after being made to kill them, she planned on taking her own life. And Sarah repeatedly said that she would rather see the kids dead than in care or the social. And police, they take this as a motive. They know Sarah's lying, so they take what she's saying as a motive. However, in the next room, Brandon, he's being interviewed, and he just basically tells police everything. He tells them the God's honest truth. He said that his reason was due to anger for the sexual misconduct allegations, stating that he wanted to rip the boys' heads off, and added, "I wanted to grab them and strangle the life out of them." Police then found digital evidence, so obviously what I was saying earlier about them Googling methods of killing people. The police were undoubtedly going to find this, and they did. So the police are able to charge both Brandon and Sarah with murder and attempted murder. So both the boys, their funerals, because of obviously the nature of what happened to them, the murder, there's a long, lengthy inquest. They've got to gather as much information as they can to put forward a real strong case to see justice. So around 2 months later, on the 8th of August, the boys are finally laid to rest. This was with friends, family and the Sheffield community in attendance. And obviously, like I said earlier, both the boys had a real deep affinity and love for fast cars and motorbikes. And over 300 motorbikes and 2 Lamborghinis. They leaded the funeral procession. They drove in front of the boys' coffins. And this was to their final resting place. So, with Brandon and Sarah, luckily they pled guilty in the end, which spared a real lengthy trial. So they enter a plea deal, and they plead guilty to 2 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 6 counts of conspiracy to murder. In November 2019, both were found guilty by unanimous vote, and they were sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 35 years. So it just basically means they have to serve that 35 years before they are even considered for parole, and their parole date is actually set for the 3rd of November 2054. So the 4 surviving boys, they were then placed into care, with the older 2 said to have been deeply traumatised after witnessing the deaths and also learning the truth about their parentage. Both of them have said that they are terrified that they will turn out like their mum, like their parents, sorry, and that they want Brandon and Sarah to actually stay in prison for the next 300 years. Now, I couldn't find any information on what they've been up to in prison. What I do know is that Sarah, she was actually sent to HMP Newhall, and this is the same prison that Rose West and Lucy Letby are being held in. Obviously, as I'm going to say that way, we all know that prisoners get transferred from one prison to another, and especially someone like Sarah, because she will be regarded as the lowest of the low in prison. She will be shipped around for the next 35 years, or however long she's got left on her sentence, to protect her in a way, protect the prison's reputation, because she is going to have a lot of people after her. But with all that said and done, I couldn't find any information on Brandon, what prison he's being held in. I can equally assure you that he's obviously not going to have the easiest time of it either. Probably even worse than what Sarah's going to face, because no one is going to view them in a positive light. So I will end the story there. I hope it's a case that you guys are not familiar with. I hope it's a case that if you are familiar with it, that I've given you some extra information possibly. I always really appreciate you guys giving me the time and space, and please leave a like, share, please comment. I always read your comments, and I'll see you guys in the next true crime story with Silhouette.